Welcome to the Essential Libertarian, giving you the tools for self-governance. Today, I have my amazing co-host, Daniel Vitro. Daniel, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing really well, So I'm going to take a break from talking about this issue, that issue, although we'll get into some stuff, but really what everybody's looking at is the Virginia election. Now, funny enough, I didn't know who Youngkin was till a few days ago, and I don't think it's necessary to go back his whole history, his whole life, see everything he did. I don't like when politicians do that on anybody because, hey, I did some dumb things in my 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, especially when you're going back under the pretext to use it against, anyone, not just politicians. But I think that's at the heart of all cancel culture, right? Is this idea that like somewhere in your life you haven't done anything wrong or you haven't said something bad. Like that idea is just completely unrealistic. Like if you go far enough back, let's just say you're 50 years old. If you dig deep enough, right, you're going to find mistakes. You're going to find errors. You're going to find bad decisions. You're going to find maybe words that you wouldn't say now, but you did when you were younger. You're going to see that progression. But the idea that if you're not squeaky clean and if you've said like a swear word or maybe you even made a joke that was kind of racy, not racist, but a racy joke, like the idea that we should cancel you for that because you're not pure used to be a Puritan conservative idea, but now that's kind of been taken over by the modern left, which is just, it's crazy to kind of see.
Yeah, it's actually crazy to see because I remember, growing up in the 90s, how even in the 90s, it was kind of the conservative, right? Oh, we don't want to see this. We don't want to hear this. You shouldn't use these words. Even during the George Bush era, oh, okay, well, we don't. Even Lewis Black made a joke. He's like, these are the line of people who are going to take down, the bad guys in the Middle East, and they're the tough guys. But the word, insert any bad word makes them cry. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, he said the F word or the S word. Don't do that. Hey, look, we bombed Baghdad. Isn't that great? Like,
I know it's like we can kill 1 million Iraqis, but when it comes to Janet Jackson's nipple slipping out, oh, we got to implement even more censorship, and it's like the whole world melted down. Like, I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, it was literally that, and that's not even an exaggeration. There were people like, oh, how could this? I mean, it's a wardrobe. Every wardrobe, I'm sure, malfunctions. I'm like, whatever. Yeah, but it's switched now. It kind of switched, and I think that's due to largely to the education system, to Hollywood, to the media. But for a long time, it used to be just, the right was going to cancel everybody, and now the left's doing it. And I think people just got tired of it on both sides. People are really sick of it on both sides. I even know people on the left who don't like this. So when it comes to Virginia, I don't think it was a big deal until just recently. Like, it was kind of like, okay, well, Youngkin's going to get beat, or, okay, it kind of looks, or like Terry's going to take it away. And I really don't have a huge dog in this fight, mainly because I'm not super educated on both candidates. To be fair, I don't say anything
absolutely.
about it.
Yeah, I was looking at that article from NPR just recently before I got on. And one thing I will say, man, is like we were just talking about that switch. I kind of want to focus on that because it ties into this election, and it ties into what basically the modern Democratic Party is. And I think part of the reason why we see, there's this idea that there was a switch was because of two things. One, the ability to decipher and share information is completely different than it was in the early 2000s and the 90s. There's so many things that probably occurred back then that we are not aware of because the internet was not there. I think that the Democrat Party has always been close to this, not quite this, but it's been very close. It was just better at being more colloquial and masking itself And back then, the agenda worked. It wasn't as radical, right? Especially after the Reagan administration, because after the Reagan administration, basically what the Democratic Party did was push themselves more to the right, because they felt if they didn't, they would never win another election, because Reagan obliterated anyone he went against, like dominated. Like, he was so popular back then because of his economics and his views on a lot of geopolitical issues and foreign relations, foreign affairs. And I personally liked a lot of some of Reagan's foreign affairs. There were some things I disagreed with, but he was popular nonetheless. So then they kind of tilted more into the right. And then what happened is the right tilted more and more to the left. And those classic neocons and even the older sort of the real racist types conservatives who were really racist and like that guy who shouted out queer in the middle of a Congress meeting with Bernie Sanders in the 90s, for example. All those guys are gone. And so you had this new right, which was more left as far as social issues and was more open. And then the left went so far to the right. And then into the 2012 election, which was when Obama won re-election, that's when this sort of identitarianism and this sort of fictionism is what I call it. It just really radical left-wing politics, but it's not even really based in left. It's so hard to kind of really put on. But if I were to describe one word of what the modern Democratic Party, it would be postmodernist. That's really what they are, right? That's the whole basis of their entire philosophy. And I'm not saying all people who consider themselves on the left, because it is a compass, but I'm just talking specifically about the modern Democrat Party of Nancy Pelosi, of just about every Democrat politician who's in office right now, especially in Congress, especially in the Senate. They're the definition of postmodernists. They're the definition of identitarians, right? They focus on three things: race. They focus on race. They focus on division, and they focus on, let's just say, trans/gender issues, right? So that's sort of why McAuliffe is actually losing right now, is because he tried to do what they did to Trump, right? He tried to play the race card in the very beginning, but he didn't go really after it that hard. But recently, dude, he's seen the fact that what he's saying is not working on Youngkin, because Youngkin is not Trump. He doesn't have the same temperament as Trump. He doesn't speak the same as Trump. His history is far different from Trump. You know, he worked at the Carlyle Group, which is a private equity firm, for, I believe, 15 years. He moved up to the CEO of this private equity firm, right, which was a great firm and still is, and then retired in 2000. He made it to CEO in 2010, and then stepped down for election in 2020. So this guy really has no sort of history of any politics. So it's really hard to get him on policy.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's break all that down, because people we got a comment. Buck Fiden, I didn't say anything bad there. Vote red. Okay,
let's go Brandon. Just say that.
Let's go Brandon. Brandon told me that central institutions almost always fail because they're not capable of real republicanism, which is being able to allow for social cooperation to be handled in the jurisdiction of the state, which isn't perfect, but it's closer to you. So that's what Brandon told me. I'm just relaying the message.
You're good.
Not that I made that message up. Okay. There's a whole lot what you said there. So I didn't know what the heck postmodernist was, and I agree with all of your assertions there, how it went slow, how they went to the left and to the right. And actually, I'll preface it to start with this. When I was young, I was into punk rock, and then I was into Johnny Rotten was a guy I really liked from the Pistols. And he said he never thought he'd see the day where the left would be kind of authoritarian and the right would be fighting for it. And I never, I was really, really upset because I have the CD. I didn't smash it yet, but I will on live stream of I mean, like you talk about heavy metal. I'm not sure what you're into, Daniel. So
Like Rage Against the Machine,
yeah, Rage Against the Machine.
Metallica.
Yeah, but like that Vietnamese monk self, emulating. I was like, man, that is. I haven't found a better, I'm sure there's great covers of albums. I'm not saying
Yeah.
like I dislike metal albums, but like to really put a metal album out there with that, I was like, whew, that is hardcore. Like you want to talk about a good album cover to convey, hey, we're anti-Vietnam, we're the hippies, peace and love. I'm like, that doesn't really get me. Check out this as a Buddhist monk, like as George Carlin said, I don't see these pro-lifers doing that. He said, religious people in Vietnam knew how to put on like a moral protest. I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, referring to like the Vietnamese people.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing now is exactly what Johnny Rotten said. And what I think happened is during the time of the Occupy Wall Street, Tim Pool has that joke where the CEOs, like they're all protesting against corporations and bailouts, introduce them to identity politics. The main component of identity politics, as you said to me, at least one of them, is postmodernism. And here's my understanding of it from Jordan B. Peterson, because I read Foucault for a little bit, but then I'm not very good with reading something if I don't enjoy it. I'm just like so that could be my detriment, or just because I don't have a whole lot of time, because I'm a freelancer and I work full time and I try and do business stuff in this show. So it is what it is. But to my knowledge, postmodern basically says, and it could be any issue. It could be race issues. It could be trans issues. It could be this issue. It could be any issue. It could be, hey, these people wear masks. These people don't. Therefore, my social currency. To me, it's a social currency thing of power. Meaning, if you're in this category, oh, I'm this. It could be race. It could be anything else. It could be if I have this money, then I'm better in social status. Or if I'm this race now and this political ideology and this, I live my life this way and I espouse these views and I say all the right talking points, then my social currency is up here. Boom. And if so-and-so doesn't, or they have the wrong identity, or they have the wrong politics, to me, it's more about your politics than your physical attributes, then you're down here. And if I'm up here, I can have more power. So basically, it's a way to flip. Instead of saying, okay, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie doesn't work, what else can we do? Well, why don't we say, hey, if I'm for example, indigenous so-and-so, and I come from this background, and I happen to be of this persuasion, and I love these people, then, or I'm into, you can just come up with the craziest thing you want, like, I'm trans, Muslim, LGBT, this, that, then I'm up here. I have the talking points, if I have the right politics. And then the person below, oh, okay, well, I'm just a regular guy. Okay, you're down here. And they can use that as a playing field to elevate, to get more power. So we're still trying to get more power. Politics is always trying to get more power. It's just they're using the playing field instead of a hierarchy of competence. It's a hierarchy of perceived what I say, in the sense that it may or may not exist, victimhood based on either immutable or changeable physical characteristics. That right?
So you're on point there, and you're also looking at it more from a sort of like a financial perspective. And one thing that I think is key that postmodernism really does, and it's one of the most, I don't like the word beautiful because it's not a positive thing, but one thing that postmodernism is great at doing is inverting language and softening language and manipulating definitions to fit different agendas and narratives, which then inverts reality, right? So when your reality is twisted, when words don't really mean what they actually mean, and when words are then exaggerated Like, for instance, when you say like Z, Zers, he, right? You know, we can all talk about like the debate on whether transgenderism is this or that, right? I don't want to debate that. What I do want to debate is the fact that now we have an unlimited set of genders, and forget whether whether you think transgenderism is real, you know, however you want to define it as. But the fact that now that sort of postmodernist idea that kind of went into the gender thing is now integrated in American law. For example, in my state, in every state, Biden signed an executive order. One of the first things he did when his administration took office that basically banned people from segregating and what's the word I'm looking for? Segregating and separating people based off of gender identity. The thing about gender identity is the way that it's defined by the law is by the individual. So the individual now gets to make up exactly what their gender identity is, and it turns out and this is in most of the people who are like really, really trans will go all the way so far as to say there's an infinite amount of genders, right? Endless amounts. There's not 2, there's not 3, there's not 4, there's not 5. There's an infinite amount of genders. Therefore, there's an infinite amount of things that one could say that would basically put them in a certain identity, which now is a protected class in the United States of America. You cannot discriminate. That's the word. You cannot discriminate against them. But the thing is they get to define exactly what it is they are. So if you, let's just say, you know, I'm not saying I am or you are, anyone is this, but let's say you are a pedophile and you want to identify as a woman to go in a woman's bathroom. Well, the officer legally now cannot discriminate against you on the basis of your gender identity, even though it's completely fabricated by you. So that's just a small example. But at the bottom of postmodernism, right, it was basically founded. One of the architects of it, a lot of people say, is Robert Venturi, right? You can go ahead and research that for anyone listening.
Question.
Robert, go ahead.
Because the person that Peterson talked about was Foucault and Jacques Derrida. Now, I don't know, because the funny thing is, and then there are other conservatives who, I'm really curious now, because there's other conservatives say it was that guy who did it. It was that guy. It started with Karl Marx. No, it started with I think Peterson said Jacques Derrida, and it might be also this guy you're talking about.
Yeah, Derrida is a big one as well.
Is there any relation with Derrida and this dude?
So Venturi was a theorist of postmodernism and added a lot to it, but he was also an architect, which is why they call him an architect of postmodernism. He built his buildings to illustrate his ideas of postmodernism. He worked at the Academy of Rome. I think he died recently too. Like, he died at least within the last 5 years or so. But he was very prominent, and Deirdre as well was very, very prominent, right? There's a group of these people who all contributed to the idea of postmodernism, which it makes sense why this theory kind of came to life in the 20th century, because it was so miserable, so bad, so many disasters, so many genocides, that the way that we were suffering called for such a radical change in a sort of societal theory, right? Just like communism and socialism and all that, like the way that they were propagated made sense because of the time frame. Like, you would not see socialism and communism rising up in an area or a locale which is living by good means, which is living and can have food to eat. No, these theories, generally speaking, were propagated at the 20th century or at the end of the 19th century, where there was a lot of bloodshed, where there was a lot of revolutions, where there was a lot of war, when it was much more harder to live if you were an average individual, which then resonated with people. But now it's much more harder to go and preach about socialism and communism, because a lot of people actually know what it is. Because at one point in the United States during the 80s, Ronald Reagan talked about the gulags openly, which is crazy to think about. When was the last political person you heard bring up the gulags, right? I can't think of one. But
I can't think of anyone, and well, unless you're counting Alexander Solzhenitsyn and
well,
I think Putin didn't talk about gulags, but he's alluded to.
He has, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Putin hasn't like brought up gulags, but he said like
he might have.
He said the course we're going similar to the USSR. Peterson talked about it, but I don't know if you consider Peterson a political figure in that sense, more of a psychologist.
I would consider him a political figure, but I'm talking more like actually has a role in government. I definitely consider him a figure. Like, for instance, Ronald Reagan directly quoted Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and that's a big deal, right? It was a big deal to recognize what happened because all that stuff really didn't get leaked out until the end of the 50s and the 60s when Alexander came out with the Gulag Archipelago, which really just like brought down, not actually physically, but sort of metaphysically brought down the Soviet Union as far as their atrocities they committed on their people, and really how they were able to make those weapons, how they were able to produce such resources. It wasn't as pretty as they tried to make it seem, and that's why you need propaganda, because to make something seem as it's not, you need some way to mask it, and that technique of masking it, generally speaking, has been propaganda. But that's sort of the mechanism of propaganda has changed over time, right? Look back to the old days. It was the printing press. It was books. It was TV shows. It was paper advertisements. Now it's the social media. It's on YouTube videos. It's on everywhere. And as technology has advanced, the ability to control narrative has as well, which is why like we're constantly fighting this game, me and you and everyone who's trying to seek the truth and trying to get actual information. Is like every time we move ahead, you know, government and the state, if you really want to break it down, keeps moving ahead as well to try and silence not just our ability to speak, not just our First Amendment, but our ability to absorb others' First Amendment right? Because forget shutting down what people say. If you can just simply stop people from comprehending and absorbing other people's information, well, then you're putting a block through the political road line where the people with money and wealth, even if it's not that, not that much, are the ones who can get accurate information, and the ones who are on the lower class cannot access actual information. And this is, I think you would agree, Kareem, sort of like the basis of a social credit score. It's separating individuals into two classes, right? Those who obey the state, those who obey what the government says, and those who don't.
Yeah, I definitely think it's broken down into that. And another thing I'll mention about postmodernism before we really go into the Virginia thing is this. To my understanding, it's predicated on the only thing is power, but it's also predicated on there's nothing really of value more than anything else. So one thing it gets correct. The basis of what it gets correct is, okay, when you have an event or you have something happen or you have an occurrence, you can have multiple different interpretations of that, multiple different interpretations of how to act upon it. I agree with that, because when you're programming AI, robots, anything like that, there's tons of interpretations there. Where it goes wrong is it says those interpretations are equally valid. So, okay, there is a thing as gender. Okay, yeah, I'm not debating that. And they would say, yeah, there is. Okay, but now we have, like you're saying, there's 50 million. To me, it's like, wait, whoa, no, there's things that have certain value, like, okay, there's a man, there's certain attributes to that, there's a woman. I'm not saying one's better than the other, because you need both of them to continue life on this planet, and you need both of them to have a household. So that being said, I think that's the issue with postmodernism is, yeah, there are multiple interpretations to an event, to certain things, to art, to things. I get it. There is subjectivity. No one's arguing against subjectivity in the world. I think what they're arguing is saying there's no value to these different subjective interpretations.
Yeah. So
you could say, even for instance, like me and you are having this conversation, and I can say, okay, well, I have this many viewers, this many stuff, so I can see how it did, as opposed to these videos. I can see like, okay, is this content, better than another piece of content. And then people can go ahead and judge that by, free market mechanisms like views, comments, things like that, engagement, or another metric. But then you can decide, okay, this talking about these current events is better, gets you more interaction than these current events. Say, if I talk about something else tomorrow. So there is different value scales based on subjective interpretation, which I think is where it misses. Just like, or another example, I think, is cryptocurrency. There's a lot of different, okay, this coin does this coin does this token does this token doesn't do anything. It's just part of a community and it looks cool. People are going to use subjective value, like we're taught in Austrian economics, to say, I value this over this. And if one coin goes up to, or one token goes up to 1 cent, or one token goes up to $5, it has more value than that other token. And you can't really deny that on a numerical scale, which I think is why postmodernism can't kind of really get too far into like physics, math, programming, and statistical analysis. But when you have disciplines like the arts, it's more subjective there, because is the Mona Lisa a good or bad painting? It's kind of hard to say. It is timeless. It has historical value, but you can say, well, I like Van Gogh better than the Mona Lisa. And no one's really right there. There's not as much subjective value there, but that's not to say subjective value doesn't exist. So I tried to do my best to dissect postmodernism based on what I know.
And I'll say one last thing on postmodernism, and we can come back to it if you want. But like you were saying, when it comes to prices and value systems in the economy, right? While one person might have a subjectivity liking to one thing more than another, right? That doesn't change the fact that certain products are worth a certain value.
One person might have
It's echoing. I don't know why it's echoing. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And it's not to say, excuse me, some products have a certain value because of the nature of their resources and the fact that a certain product is worth a certain amount because there's a certain amount of that product available. So there's an objective area when it comes to prices and values, but there's also an objective value system put on goods which are in shortage, which are not in shortage, which are resources that took a certain amount of labor to produce. So subjectivity plays into the market without a doubt, but there are value systems for a lot of set things because those things are worth a certain amount because of labor and because of whether or not that's scarce or not. So I think what you're saying is right. So basically flip what you said on its side and basically say that postmodernism is basically denying objectivity in a lot of ways. For instance, if you were to like just say a few sentences of what really postmodernism is, it's basically those who consider themselves postmodernists generally make the claims that value systems and socially and that they're socially conditioned. And they're products of political and cultural change, and that hierarchies are only and solely predicated on power. Now, the problem with this, and this is the biggest problem I and probably Jordan Peterson, a lot of other guys have, when you try and deny basically the historical context of hierarchies so far as they're concerned biologically, right? Because forget the political ideas and what surrounds political hierarchies, because there is definitely such a thing as a political hierarchy. But the majority of all hierarchies are based on two things, right? Competence and dominance, right? Those are the two most basic hierarchies, right? Competence hierarchies are simply this. Those at the bottom go towards the top vertically because they're more competent. And you can, just because you're competent does not mean that you cannot fall down the competence hierarchy. But one thing that's interesting about competence hierarchies is, generally speaking, a lot of clinical and psychologists would say that you can fall down in IQ points, but it's very difficult to even bring your IQ up 2 points, right? That's like miracle land right there. And almost all psychologists unanimously agree on that. So if you can't really bring your IQ level up, but you can bring it down, then it goes to say that whatever your IQ is, that's most likely where you're going to fall on the competence hierarchy unless that goes down. So you could even say that a large portion of a lot of competence hierarchies are based on just IQ or biological intelligence, as you would say, which is basically like if you've ever took a SAT, all an SAT is an IQ test, but it's written a little different, right? They test you on all subjects. They test you on math. They test you on English. They test you on history. That's basically what an IQ exam looks like. And then by who gets the highest scores goes into the best schools.
Yes.
So not all hierarchies are predicated on power, and hierarchies are not a new phenomenon. In fact, as long as there's been animals, even organisms have social hierarchies, or social dominance and competence hierarchies. The smallest of life have hierarchies. Hierarchies are not innate to culture or politics, but are innate to living things. And that's all I would say on that.
Well, because you have to have some way to evaluate what's scarce, what's valuable, and what's not. Because if you can't do that, then you're not able to make conscientious decisions based on, what is going to better your life or not. That being said, I argue, and I think a lot of people could argue, that classical liberals, minarchists, and myself being an ANCAP say the problem actually is with hierarchies is that dominance hierarchies are always predicated on expropriation, coercion, and if it gets to there, violence. Usually, when you challenge them, and extortion, all those fun things.
Well,
so I would argue to have a really to have a voluntary, or at least to have a just society, to have a moral society. You would have hierarchies, because a lot of the left anarchists say no hierarchies. Hierarchies are going to exist. They exist in nature, but you should only have hierarchies of competence. Okay, I'm really good at, trading crypto, so I'll have more cryptocurrency than you. You're good at this. You're good at arts, so you can be at the top of this. But that should be the only hierarchies there. It shouldn't be a hierarchy of, well, I have more power than you because I can use some kind of leverage against you. You can correct. You wanted to say something, right?
I wanted to say that what you're talking about is when dominance hierarchy become very corrupted. Like, dominance hierarchies are very good in a lot of ways. For instance, dominance hierarchies are pretty much the reason why a lot of people progress in society, right? If there weren't dominance hierarchies, there would be a severe lack of competition, right? Competition and dominance hierarchies kind of go hand in hand. But it's when dominance and competence and really all hierarchies, go away, when they fail, when they become corrupted. And generally speaking, I like to say generally because there's such a thing, and I'm talking about this in my book, something called horizontal hierarchies. And anyways, generally speaking, vertical hierarchies, right, whether they dominance or competence, get corrupted at the top, right? Let's just take a small example. Let's say you have a business of 200 employees, and let's just say a CEO, a CFO, and managers, right? So if the CEO, we could say in this consideration, is at the top of the workplace and dominance hierarchy, and maybe not competence hierarchy, because he might not be more competent than everyone else. But let's say dominance, and let's say workplace hierarchy. If he becomes a thief, if he steals, if he robs, if he does a lot of bad stuff, let's just say he doesn't even necessarily do it to his workers, but he does it in front of the CFO. Well, the CFO sees that the person at the top of the workplace hierarchy has become corrupted, and he says, "Well, why the hell not? There's no way I can get rid of him, right? Because he's ahead of me, he's above me." And then the managers under the CFO see that the CFO is now being corrupted, and then that's when hierarchies collapse in on themselves.
Yes.
And they become very, very, very dangerous. That's what's happened to our federal government. That's what's happened to universities, to schools. Those at the top set an example for those at the middle, and then those at the middle set an example for those at the bottom. And if that goes astray, well, then we have a problem on our hands.
But let me do a real quick differentiation. Then I do want to get into the news. But to me, a dominance hierarchy is that I have some kind of political or some kind of coercive power over you. A competence hierarchy, like a CEO, means, hey, I can make this company millions and millions of dollars. I have these speaking skills. I have this knowledge of this. I know how to innovate. Like, and I always make the argument, people like, well, Kareem, you don't like the actions of, like, you know, Bill Gates and Bezos and Zuckerberg with his Meta thing, and you're always making fun of that. And I do, but that's not to say I'm going to take away from the fact that they have very high competency in business or software engineering. But I think the world will be better if, like, hey, hierarchies are based on, I'm the best plumber, as Peterson says, because I can fix the most clogged drains, or I can fix the most issues with pipes breaking. And I don't know. To me, competence hierarchies means you're very good at a specific thing or trade or skill. Dominance means that, hey, I can dominate you with whatever it is. Doesn't have to be direct violence, but it can be coercion, it can be an army, it can be like threats, it can be, hey, I'm going to dominate you in this sense, and I'll try it back to here because I can control the education. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I kind of want to go back to Virginia if we can.
Yeah,
so,
let's go.
So let me ask this, because I took a look at Glenn Youngkin in this, and I think the big thing that it's coming down to education. And I heard that, now you correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I'm just kind of spitballing here about what I heard, what I know. That's not necessarily the best for a political show, I get it, but hey, it kind of just came up, and I did my research as quick as I could. Terry, how do I say his last name? McAuliffe said, I want to keep parents out of the classrooms. Now, that doesn't make any sense. The only thing I find that funny is, like, if he gets in, it could backfire, and parents are like, okay, I'm taking all my kids out of the classrooms. And, hey, kid, get on Udemy and Skillshare. Here's $10. Go be a graphic designer. And I'm kind of kidding, but
what he said was even worse than that, though. He didn't say that. He said, I don't believe that parents have a say in what their children learn. That's what he said, which is, I think, even worse, right? Because not only is he kind of coming at parents in a sort of subtle but not subtle way, he's coming at children as well.
Yeah, saying that they have to be instructed by
exactly
teachers say, because, hey, that's going to keep more. But I understand when you look at it from a Austrian or a, you know, kind of an incentives perspective, it makes sense. People like, I don't get that. It makes sense to me why I'd say that, because, hey, the teachers are almost, like Adam Carolla would say, they're almost all going to be to the left. You get a couple right-wing teachers, but not a lot. So if teachers have a monopoly on education, they're going to get more and more kids being Democrats. They go to college, they go even further, and that helps them stay in power with all the other, you know, things that are going on. So I know why he's saying that, but Glenn Youngkin's pushing back, saying no, you know, that he's having a little bit more freedom on education. I don't know where he stands with because, again, I didn't have time. I don't know where he stands with the medical stuff. I don't know where he stands on taxes and things. It does seem he'd be a little bit better choice, but and I do like the fact that he's kind of a chill conservative, but I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Carlyle Group, I do know, was affiliated with George W. Bush and stuff. So I'm wondering,
back in the 2000s.
I'm wondering, part of me, I listened to him. Okay, I guess my question would be to you. Yes, he seems to be soft-spoken. He seems to be the better choice. But that being said, I think it would be good, you know, just to get freedom in the class. But would he be, in my opinion, close to what you would? I know the term is being misused now, but like, do you see any rhino in him, regardless of Terry? Does he? I'm
glad you asked me this question, actually, because I've been kind of Listen, this guy has no political history, right? And sadly we can't see exactly what he did in the Carlyle Group because it's private, because it is a private company, right? So a lot of what he did for a long time does remain, under the bounds of whether he releases it or not. So, the question, what'd you say?
Is it, because here's the only question I have. Generally, when stuff is generally that I know George Bush was involved from Michael Moore's movie with the Carlyle Group. I question how much Carlyle was private if George Bush is involved, because you have a president involved and you probably see administration.
I see exactly what you're saying.
It's kind of like a corporatist thing at that, like, oh, hey, I'm funneling money in here. Look at the corporate logo. You're not private. So sorry for that. Sorry for that thing. I shouldn't have interjected, but I just
no, you're good. And you're right. I think that's not just the Carlyle Group, but I think that's Facebook. I think that's Twitter. I think that's even, people are going to probably knock me for saying this, but that's even Tesla, right? When companies are not only given basic subsidies, but are financed and and those same companies lobby back to politicians to get certain policy in place, which makes it easier to dominate competition. Well, I think that's the definition of corporatism, of a micro version of fascism. It's bad. Now, I am not like an expert in everything the Carlyle Group does. Both Bushes were involved in them. In the Carlyle Group. It's basically a global private equity firm. It's the largest private equity firm. I think it's the world's largest private equity firm in the world. So that's crazy. But basically what they do is they raise capital and, they finance certain things, fund certain things. What private equity firms do, except they're just a global one. And the question is he a rhino? Is he masquerading as this freedom, liberty type conservative? Well, there's no evidence to really show me that he's like a neocon. In fact, there's a lot of evidence showing me not. He's never really been outspoken of Bush's. He never I couldn't find anything about him even supporting Bush. So he did rise to CEO level in 2010. Of the Carlyle Group. And I don't know how much they have changed since the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, but I'd imagine it's been much different, because when you look at the list of the people on the Carlyle Group, there's a lot of people on there you might recognize. The founder of it was a guy named David Rubenstein, if you've ever heard of him.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So, but again, it was founded in 1986 or 86 or 87. So things can change within organizations and whatnot. But again, back to the basic question. Is he masquerading as a pro-liberty, pro-freedom guy? I don't believe he is, but I do believe he, financially speaking, has certain policies that he wants to implement. And I think actually a lot of his work from the Carlyle Group could be a good thing, right? Because this guy wasn't like a Bush or something like that who was on a sort of organization making deals, taking money and using it basically as a form of campaign finance, basically, and also funding to other campaigns in which they wanted to fund. He managed a large amount of assets, a large amount of capital. Bush was never ever the head of the Carlyle Group, right? Not to say that that's necessarily a good thing, but he has experience in working with large amounts of capital and dealing with business. And you see some of his interviews before he ever said he was going to run for governor, and he seems exactly the same. He seems like you said, very mild-mannered, kind of conservative type, basic sort of trickle-down economics, but also some sort of like Mises-esque economics, really focused on economics and financing the economy. And he seems the same. He like everything that I've seen, he doesn't seem like there's, one thing he's saying this, and then now he's running for political office and he's contradicting that. I don't see a lot of contradictions. I see, like you said, a guy who's a businessman, similar to Trump in the fact that he did run a business for a long time and a successful one at that. Mm-hmm. And I think that could be good. But I think when it comes down to it, and this is kind of scary, but like we'll never really know if he is, let's just say he is a neocon. Let's just say he is masquerading as a pro-liberty type conservative to take office and win votes and pretend to be a populist. We won't really know that until he wins, but everything that I've collected, that I've observed, shows me that he's not. And I've talked to many other people about it, and they said, no, man, I don't think he is. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be perfect, but I think the key to point out in this race is the tyranny versus liberty debate, and the fact that you pointed out that McAuliffe was the one saying he wants to keep parents away from the school board and not controlling what their children see. He wants to make the unvaccinated feel uncomfortable. He already said as soon as he gets in, he's going to mandate vaccines. He's going to do what New York and California are doing. So those two things alone, I can't say everything I firmly stand on Youngkin, but I can say in those two things, I firmly stand on the fact that he will not do that. Right. And that at the bare minimum is, I think, should be like the ground floor. And then we can talk about economics. But McAuliffe has, when he was governor from, was it 2010-ish to 2014, had some of the worst jobs numbers, implemented some policies, which he started these right here, which is really what I want to break down. And he was the one who propagated all this in 2014. He really started all this stuff, which got passed in 2019, and almost all of them passed in 2020. But these were in the legislative process, like sitting bills, way prior to 2020. So he started a lot of this policy, which is now in law, which is basically what I'm holding right now is something that says, I don't know if you can see it. Can you read that?
Hold on. Not. To be honest, not really.
Okay.
Kind of
you're good. Yeah. So basically what this is evidence in the state of Virginia, I'm not speaking for, the whole country, but in evidence that critical race theory has been implemented in the legislative process, has been put through by laws, legal laws that have been signed, legal bills, which are not just like sort of manipulated terms. Like it's pretty outright critical race theory. Like this one is from the 2020 Special Session 1, SB 5030, which this is the one that got me looking into more of these because there's like 10 of them, right? So this is policing reform, acquisition of military property, training of officers, and de-escalation techniques, right? But there's a part of this I really want to go over, right? Because you have to look. Should have probably highlighted it.
A big question after this.
Here is it right here. So let's start right here. This will work perfect. Okay, the bill also revises the basic training and recertification requirement of training in sensitivity to and awareness of cultural diversity and the potential for biased policing to include awareness of racism and the potential for racially biased policing. 2, recognizing implicit bias. That's an obvious critical race theory word. Just go ahead and look through all your critical race theory books. You'll see that in there many times. Anyways, implicit biases in interacting with persons who have a mental illness, substance use, or disorder, or developmental cognitive disability. And this, right, what you just read, goes over teachers, goes over firemen, goes over judges, goes over police officers. And then there's this one this is the 2020 session, number 853. And this one says, no later than December 1st, the Department of Education shall develop a model curriculum and teacher training module for providing age-appropriate instruction on genocide, racism, harassment, discrimination, and historical injustice in grades kindergarten through 12 as a method of providing anti-bias education. The model curriculum and teacher training model shall, at a minimum, include information, guidance, case studies, and instructional lessons on the following topics: the Holocaust and other genocides in the context of how lower levels of hate, ridicule, and dehumanize led to larger acts of violence and state-sponsored discrimination and violence, the impact of tools for responding to different forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, slavery, and other forms of historical dehumanizing injustice. And this just goes on and on, bill after bill. It's everything that critical race theory is put right into law. And you know what Terry McAuliffe's going to stand up there and say, like he did yesterday, his last campaign rally? He said critical race theory does not exist. right? They're going to tell you the opposite of reality so many times you're going to believe it's reality. You're going to think, oh, well, and everybody says this doesn't exist. Everybody says that this isn't in law. And I've heard Ben Shapiro argue that it's praxis. Yes, it is being put in praxis, but people don't even look at the legislation bills that are coming out of their own state. This is in multiple states and multiple counties and multiple jurisdictions, and it's not praxis. This is putting critical race theory into legislation, which passes through. This is legal fortification of critical race theory. So can we please, I'm asking everyone out there who's conservative, libertarian, start arguing on the basis of the Democrats and whoever's proposing critical race theory's argument. You should not argue from whether critical race theory is being taught in schools or not. You should simply argue that it's in legislation and it has been passed through over a year ago. That's where the base of the argument should start, because if not, you're going to get, I mean, it's just going to look bad, because this is so bad that every time I look at it, I get kind of mad. But like, this one is a bill to amend the Code of Virginia by adding a section numbered 19.226201 relating to voir dire examination of persons called as jurors in criminal cases. This is basically implementing critical race-like theory into jury selection and how they monitor jurors. Like, this thing is everywhere, and people will still tell you it's simply not in schools. This one is wild. An act to amend the Code of Virginia by adding a section number 22.1.208.02 relating to the culturally relevant and inclusive education practice advisory committee. There's a whole critical race theory advisory committee for the state of Virginia, approved March 31st, 2020. This has been in legislation for a long time, and people keep trying to like argue on the basis of whether it's being practiced or not. It's not. It's objectively in multiple states' legislation. It's probably in yours. It's probably in someone who's listening. The thing is that there's so many of them, and they're shoved at the bottom of the list that you have to go through all your bills in your state to look for these things. But they're in there, and they have been in there. And this is why I think everyone. I don't usually say this. I'm not saying vote for him because he's a Republican, but it was originally McCullough. It was originally Obama. It was originally a lot of those Democrats from 2012 to 2015 who really started this. And it was under the pretext of COVID that they really pushed this through while so much other chaos was happening. All these bills are 2020, right? But a lot of them were proposed way earlier than that. So it's crazy, man. And people will still tell you that it's not in law, that it's not a real thing. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a few thoughts on this. One was actually after 2020 election, someone opened my eyes to this, because there's always saying, okay, who's the president? Who's the president? Like, I want JoJo or Dave Smith, and people saying we got to get Biden, we got to get Trump. And a lot of people I noticed, even around my hometown, I would say, who's the governor, you know, and a lot of people didn't know, or some people started to know after. But before this whole thing, nobody knew. And then I started asking, who's on your school board doing I don't know. Who's in your city council? I don't know. Who's your mayor? We don't know. We don't really care. We just think. I'm like, okay, regardless whether the 2020, you know, there's definitely whether what happened in 2020 happened, and you know. And your opinion of it, that probably practically, I don't know if there's any, you know, things that can change it, but why are you not worried about like who's on? Because if you have people on the school board who are paying attention, you can solve some of these problems. If people in city council who are paying attention, because it's firefighters, police, and other personnel, you can solve some of these problems and get to the heart of it. And I would tell people, hey, start paying attention to state and local elections, because they're more important, not as important. They're more important than federal elections. President nothing in your life needs a president's permission. There's a whole lot of things that can be messed up at the local and state level that can give you a hard time. And I don't know if you ever looked at this CNN article, but I think it's interesting. So one question I'll pose to you is this. Do you agree? I'm going to ask you, I'm going to read it, but I will ask you this now. Do you agree with CNN and maybe I do.
Do I agree? I thought you said it was a CNN article.
It is CNN.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm going to ask you if you agree with CNN. Who wins, no matter who wins. Why do they say that? I'll cut to the chase. Yeah, it's going to be close. I don't know who's going to win, but there's no question. Win or narrowly lose, Youngkin's proved himself to be something of a rarity within the modern Republican Party, a candidate who can walk the extreme fine line between being Trumpy. That's a new adjective, I guess. Not for the GOP base, but not too Trumpy for independents and suburban swing voters. Remember, just a year ago, Joe Biden cruised to attend over Trump in Virginia, crushing the incumbent in the suburbs. So, like you were saying, if Dave Smith, your example of Dave Smith, could handle the reporters and not be nice to them, not like they give him hard questions, but him or Michael Malice is just smacking down, but they're not being rude. They're not like, haha, you look funny, haha, your dresses, haha, CNN is this, Rosie O'Donnell. Like, I get it, it's funny, but then that also gives them fuel because they're like, look, if you're in political office and you make your mom jokes, someone's going to come after you, no matter how funny I think it is. Like, yeah, Now, my question to you is, do you agree with CNN here that because he's a rarity, he can kind of have that, like, in between the GOP base of being like a little bit, he can walk the line of being a little bit scandalous, I guess. Not saying he's out there making fun of anybody, but he has that, I guess, business touch without like, haha, like the reporter, can you lose a few pounds, ma'am? Like, ha 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 ha. Because if you take that away, what else you really got to throw at people? Because to me, that was the whole he's rude, he's this, he's that. Is CNN right here?
So are they right in framing Youngkin as a sort of softer, mild-mannered conservative? Is that what sort of you're asking?
So what I'm asking is this. If you have the same kind of hard, I don't want to call it hard, if you have the same fundamental messaging as it, like, let's say you take Vermin Supreme and you put him in a tie and you took away the boot, if you know who that is, and you made it kind of refined and you gave
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Would you start to say, wow, that's an amazing candidate because he's very smart when he talks, but the boot in his head. What CNN is saying he wins no matter what is because he proved himself to be a rarity because he can walk the extremely fine line between being Trumpy enough for the GOP. So they're saying he still plays in the rules of the modern rhinos. Like, okay, he kind of has the Jeb Bushy feel, like, I'm not going to offend you. But he's not too Trumpy for independents and suburban.
Well,
meaning he has strong messaging, but he's not like, oh, you call women this and that and all.
Yeah, I agree with it a little bit. I agree with it mostly, right? As PolitiFact and Snopes would say, mostly true. But so I think that yes, he's not going to call Rosie O'Donnell, like you said, like fat. He's not going to say that stuff. But he is going to. What I saw him doing during all of his interviews, he did a lot of small town sort of interviews and podcasts. During his last rally he had yesterday, I believe. He's saying everything Trump is saying. He's just saying it in a different manner. Like, it's not like him and Trump are saying completely different things. They're almost, I go so far as to say that everything that Trump has talked about, whatever you like about Trump, not everything, okay? Like, the majority, I'd say, of why a lot of people vote for Trump, why he has such a large base, he covers all that stuff. He even talks about it in all of his campaigns and a lot of his interviews. He talks about the mandates. He talks about tyranny. He talks about the left and how bad it is and why it's bad. He has nuanced sort of discussions about all that stuff, but he seems less confrontational and less reactionary, which in my opinion, I would say is more of a positive for him than Trump, right? I think the thing with Ron DeSantis is why I think he's so dangerous, is because let's just say Trump loses his ego just to win and just to bring the conservatives up, which I don't think he'll do. Granted, I'm just saying hypothetically. Let's just say it's a DeSantis president, Trump VP as candidates, I almost think that they'd be undefeatable. In fact, I think that I don't think the left would be able to compete with them, because you're going to have to say that Ron DeSantis is a racist, which is very difficult to say that, given that he has a large support of Spanish and Latino voters, given that not only does he have large support, like everyone in Florida of all colors, Black, Mexican, Latino, love him, like really love him. It's like, dude, it's similar to the way Trump voters like Trump, but it's more in like a healthy fashion. And he's not confrontational in the sense that he's not going to say disrespectful things, but he's not afraid to go after reporters who are lying. He went after that 60 Minutes reporter who tried to paint a false narrative, but he didn't say rude, mean things. He didn't swear. He didn't, act in a certain way, but he still called them out. So I think there's a fine line between calling out the lies and being a truther, as you say, right? And kind of letting that implode on itself, because if you're being a truther but you're also being an asshole, it's kind of counterproductive. So that's
when I say a truther, I mean someone who actually delves into a truther. I think I mean something different as someone who's like looking into potential different things that are hidden on the kind of like
I see what you're saying.
Investigative journalism, in the sense that you're like digging and saying what's really going on behind these corporate.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess you're right. Not quite that. A little bit of that, but not quite that. You're right. Like, I thought you meant when you said truth, like someone who's always seeking and trying to speak the truth and like call it the lies. But yeah, not
could be. That's part of it. That is also part of it. Here's my I'll give you two more questions and then I'll be done. I just wanted to kind of since all that is true, and since CNN partially right, I'm not going to give them the credit, but hey, it's an interesting article coming from them, because I wouldn't have expected they'd say that. Is Youngkin, I'm not saying policy wise, but is Youngkin, the way he frames stuff and the way he talks and his messaging and his delivery, is it close to Spike Cohen and Dave Smith? Because I don't see Spike Cohen and Dave Smith cussing people out or like, haha, this one and that. But I actually think that, to be fair, if you're making the argument that does work and that messaging does work without being abrasive, then funny enough, you get Spike Cohen or Dave Smith or someone on a debate stage, that would make them unbeatable because they have the best policies and they're also not being abrasive too. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Well,
Am I wrong?
I agree. I think it's a better strategy, but the thing is that negativity tends to sell, and sometimes it's even popular. So the thing is if you get a guy like Dave Smith in the presidential race, right? If he actually gets in, he has a large chance of winning. But the thing is, you have to get enough people in mass to vote for him. But once he gets in an actual race, he has a better chance of winning, more so than someone who's like more focused on their base. And if you're more approachable, if you're more agreeable, then you're going to expand your votes past your base, which I think is what Dave Smith, I think Spike Cohen could do it, but I also think Glenn Youngkin can do it. But I'd say the difference between Dave Smith and Glenn Youngkin is that it's very obvious that Dave Smith is really against the state and in a way probably wants to get rid of it completely one day. But Glenn Youngkin is more of I'd say more of a minarchist. Like he's said a lot about the system and how it's broken. And that's why a lot of people have resignated, because he's admitted, like, dude, our tax system is broken. The VEC, the Virginia Employment Commission, completely, dude, 20 million people did not get their actual unemployment claims, while 20 million people got fraudulent claims.
Yeah.
So more people who weren't supposed to get unemployment got it because of how bad the system is, right? So I think he's more of a minarchist and less extreme.
I'm agreeing with you in the fact that if you take them politically, there's some big fundamental differences, and obviously that's true. Like, obviously I know that's true off from the bat, because I can just kind of tell. But yeah, I'm just saying messaging wise, Spike Cohen, Glenn Youngkin, and Dave Smith with that assertive, not aggressive.
Yes.
If you look at psychology, there's passive, which has been the Republicans and the Democrats. Just
Correct.
say whatever you want me to say, I'll say. I'll pander however you want. Just help me, get me elected. Then there's aggressive, which is Trump. Just like, we're gonna get it. This, you're that. Like, knock this guy out. You know, they're criminals. They're this, they're that, and that's really easy to attack. But if you're assertive, which is Youngkin, Spike, and Dave, okay, here's the points. Taxation's wrong because it infringes upon people who have made a certain income, and you have no right to take it. And if you're doing so, it's against natural law. Okay, well, that's a good point. You're not insulting anybody. You're not coming after a group. You're not saying, oh, these bums over there. So you're not giving the media any fuel, or very little fuel.
They'll take anything out of context. Like they'll clip it, they'll fast forward, rewind it. But I think that what you're saying is absolutely spot on. Is like try and paint Dave Smith as the way the media painted like Trump, right? They took all of Trump's bad things and showed it up. It just turns out that he has a lot of bad things. But a guy like Dave Smith, how are they going to paint him? Well, he's a comedian. Well, he really doesn't like the government. He
made a joke about this. The only attack I've seen, he made a joke about this thing or he made a joke about that. But I'm like, okay, come on. Like, that's really, really.
That's it? Yeah, exactly. Like that's.
So here's my last question about all this. If it gets pretty close, I'm not saying that I know for a fact what's happened in the past, but I do suspect in the Larry Elder election, do you think if it gets really close, we might see shut the machines down? Hey, this all popped up. Terry wins. He won by this much. And I'm not saying it has to be a lot, but do you think, okay, I'm going to be safe because do you think there might be any malpractice potential here if you get one? Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. See, I know how to tip. I'm tap dancing around the algorithm. But you get it, right? You're muted. Can I unmute you? How do I unmute him?
I'm good. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I forget when my mic unplugs it on.
I think there might be any malpractice with how the process is going. You know what? I don't want to get banned, so I'm actually being careful.
I know exactly what you're saying. And the question is, I went and voted today. Now, while I did not vote in the 2020 election for a few reasons, I talked to a lot of people who not only did vote, but who worked at the polls. I talked to poll watcher. I talked to people who are city councilmen who had a lot of hundreds of other people at polls throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. And they told me of a lot of things, right? The main thing that I saw as being really weird and peculiar was certain individuals being kicked out of polling places for not wearing a mask, and then the windows being shut, painted, or altered in some way to try and make it more discreet as to seeing in. And it seems like people who would take off their mask for a second, they would say that's a violation. You got to go. So little things like that told me that, okay, maybe there's something weird here. Now, I don't like to say the word rigged. I don't like to say the word set up. I don't like to even say the word demo like Biden. But I think that there was a non-organized occurrence happening in Virginia. That's all I can really speak on, other than what I've seen in other cases where there was a lot of what looks to be voter fraud and voter suppression. I would say more suppression and voter voter malfunctions, and let's say things like that, machines going down and then coming back up with more or less votes than they did before, things like that. So let's take that into account. Let's say that happens again. And from what I've seen, it hasn't been happening. I talked to the same guy who I'm talking about. He said that it's a lot better this year because the problem that happened last year is the ratio from Democrat to Republican poll watchers were so wide. There was way more Democrats than Republicans. They couldn't find almost anyone. So you'd have a place where there'd be like 3 Republican poll watchers and like a bunch of Democrat poll watchers, in places where sometimes he told me that there was one like poll watcher and he either had to go to the bathroom, he couldn't go to the bathroom. If he did, he'd be away, and they would continue the count of votes. Things like this that seem to be a lot better this time around. And here's what I want to read you. This is like the first 4 articles I just refreshed, and the first one is Glenn Youngkin looks to break Virginia's Democratic streak. Fact check: did Donald Trump join Glenn Youngkin's closing campaign in Virginia? The next one is Glenn Youngkin isn't Donald Trump by the Washington Examiner. Basically, it seems like they're trying to minimize what Glenn Youngkin is, saying he's not as popular. What happens if Glenn Youngkin comes close? There's a lot of media hype right now on Glenn Youngkin, and a lot of it is he could win. Now, I don't think I remember that message in the Trump election. Like, it seemed pretty outright that most people were going to vote for Biden, and the media all covered it that Trump can't win and that he won't win, and that this is that Trump was a threat to our democracy, and all these other things. It just seemed a lot different. It doesn't seem like that, because all those sort of points that the media could like capture and then show to all their audience, they just can't do that this time around. They don't have, let's just say, whether it was organized or not, the election malfunctions, right, that did happen. Like, I'm telling you, you can look it up. There's plenty of malfunctions that happen every election. Just turned out last year there was a lot more than in a lot of elections. So I think honestly Glenn Youngkin has a chance of winning this. And from what I've seen, I don't see a lot of chances of fraud. But if there's like some weird stuff, like 1 a.m. that there's no votes, if this thing gets strung out 5 days, I'm going to be a little concerned. I don't think it should be. I think this is, from what I'm seeing, tight. Like, everything's put together. There's no reason why it should take 6 days like it did last time. If that happens, I'm going to be worried.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One thing I always tell people is this: with conspiracies or anything like this, beyond even what the standards are, try and make sure you can prove something very, very strongly before you throw it out there. Otherwise, you'll get called on it. So I'm not going to say there is or isn't. I don't know. Just curious from your perspective. And we'll see. I don't know. I don't really put much like 2 cents in what the media says, even if they say this guy can win, this guy can't win, because the media is generally extremely biased, or they're just outright wrong, and they're just, in my opinion now, if they ever used to be, they're just trying to play for their side, put out a good word on my team. So that being said, we'll have to see. Definitely going to be close. It'll be interesting. I'll be watching it. The only other thing I'm going to say, and I'm not complaining here, but I am saying this: there has to be, Virginia has millions of people, as you know yourself. It would have been nice. I'm just, don't take it as a rant or anything. It would have been nice to have a libertarian voice there as well.
I agree. No, I agree.
So, just to really see how this works, because if you have a moderate conservative, and you have a Democrat, and you have a libertarian, I'm curious to see where the dividing line would be and what people would say. Oh, okay, well, I have a third chance, because I know for a fact Tim Pool has pulled this up, and I know just knocking doors, regardless of, forget Terry, but even Youngkin, even though he's saying good stuff, I'm not gonna lie to you, a lot of Republicans are tell me they're tired of Republicans, even the former president and stuff he said and did, and stuff he didn't do, and Bush and all them, and Romney and all that. I know a lot of Republicans that tell me they're tired of, they're done. They want to be done with it. I know a lot of people that, including myself, who say that, just the 2-party system in and of itself, while there might be a couple good apples in there, like Rand Paul and Massey, well, they just don't want to do it anymore. They're convinced that, and I agree with this to a large part, that a lot of these guys work together, especially when it comes to blocking a third party doing anything or getting anywhere. So that, to me, it would have been interesting just to see, if you had a libertarian, what people would want to do, because the libertarian has very strong messaging about, no, how about this? Even We don't like to put taxation at all. The public school system's completely broken. And getting very strong on things like property tax, like it should be gone. This tax, get rid of it. This tax, get rid of it. Get rid of estate tax. I just think it would have been interesting to see that kind of messaging and what people would have done. Because I'm interested to see really have people, and it really does feel like to me, a lot of people are voting for one guy just because they don't like the other guy. And that's how I felt in 2020. That's even how I feel now. A lot of people like Cajun Libertarian, I was watching his show yesterday. He's like, I don't want to do it. I don't like it, but okay, fine. Since there's no Libertarian, go vote for a Republican. But I know for a fact the Libertarians in Virginia, I don't think feel represented. And I know it's interesting. You're an ANCAP. Why do you care? Because I want to do it gradually. So that's my only thing. Like, where can the real Libertarians in Virginia please stand up? Because at this point, I think we got to capitalize and get Libertarians up who say, look, not only is the system broken, but the state cannot ever improve the system, which is what Republicans and Democrats won't really say. Not only is the system broken, the public sector cannot improve upon it. Even if they have goodwill towards improving upon it, they can generally not ever improve upon it. And that's kind of like why I've been a libertarian, because I see even when there's good practical interventions, government just doesn't seem to be able to improve upon outcomes of the market, no matter what they do. Because they don't have really the ability to do it, because they don't understand incentives, they don't understand economics, and the government has one way of doing things: force. No matter who it is, you have to eventually write a law and force someone to do something. So I just that's my only thing commentary I have for that. Whether you agree with it or not, it'd be nice to have a libertarian there.
And the thing is, though, is like, this is why I officially joined Mises, because for one, I didn't particularly vote for him because I didn't like the other candidate. I voted for him because of a lot of evidence, basically all on policy, right? I didn't vote for him because he's a nice or a mean guy. His policy is what I voted for him for. And I honestly didn't even really, let's just say 3 months ago, I didn't plan on voting in this election, right? Until I started to hear what Terry McAuliffe was saying, because he was always kind of, I wouldn't like use the term radical, but he's a standard Dem establishment type. But again, there is no libertarian presence in Virginia, and there damn sure is no actual Mises caucus presence in Virginia. Which, if there was a Mises caucus individual, unless for some reason he was someone posing as this, which generally speaking, all the Mises types I have met, they're all straightforward, they're all direct. None of them are BSers. Everyone I've met is a legitimate Mises guy and understands economics. That doesn't mean all of them are. There's a lot of guys preaching stuff that is not aligned with the Mises narrative. Now, whoever those guys are, I think you and me can both agree we disavow them, whoever they are, who's using the Mises brand to basically sell what it is that what their actual agenda is. But I would like to see not just Mises caucus rise in Virginia, but nationally, man. Because if there was an individual on this ballot that was open Mises caucus, and I saw them and heard them and heard their policy, I would have voted for them instantaneously with no question. I would have probably voted for them and no one else, right? Because I vote based on competence and efficiency, right? Whatever candidate I think is going to be the most efficient and whatever candidate I think is going to be the most competent, I voted on that. And I think this was a really big election, man. And I don't know who's going to win. It's really close right now. But for all the people in Virginia, these things that I pulled up, legislation's only as good as it lasts, and a lot of things can be put into law, but can be countered with a lot of other legislation. So let's just say Youngkin wins. He can easily put a stop to this. simply by putting in legislation that bans the practice of all this thing which this enables. So,
question though, and I'll throw this one at you. Maybe, because there's different schools of thought in looking at this and how to decrease the stick. I have one school of thought that says, yes, get people like Youngkin in, get Dave Smith in, get people in, and then you can gradually roll back bad legislation with good legislation. There's kind of a Hoppian look at this too, at Triple H I have, whereas, okay, let's assume Terry gets in and doesn't stop this. And a lot of people say, Kareem, that's terrible. You're freaking out. Why would you say that? You're an ANCAP. Well, a lot of what I find interesting is a lot of conservatives and even Trump and all that, like, oh, okay, well, the kids are being indoctrinated in schools and in colleges. COVID came. Oh, that's terrible. Close everything down. Okay, we need to get the kids back to school. I'm like, wait, didn't you say the school was indoctrinating them? Why do you want them to go back? Oh, I don't want to homeschool them. Okay, fine. Well, there's Ron Paul homeschool. There's Udemy. Show them how to garden. I don't know. Show them what you do for work. And I'm not advocating the kids work in a steel mill, but like if you're a software engineer, is it bad to see your kid like you doing C++ or Ruby or whatever? So could it actually be, if Youngkin loses, Terry does this stupid thing and parents just say, this is crazy, I have to get my kid out of school? Could Terry actually, in effect, do a libertarian thing inadvertently and actually crash the public school system because so many parents pull their kids out of school, and then people are just like, wow, all these leftist policies are backfiring so bad that we want to go to a decentralized state, even though that's not ideal. That's not the way I want it to happen, but it seems like that can happen that way. Am I thinking crazy lines?
No, and it's crazy because I posed this to my brother the other day. I simply said, if McAuliffe wins, the good thing that we do have is that we can look forward to a mass resignation and a mass protest, which we're seeing in other cities.
Yes.
Now, the thing is that while me and you both want to basically deteriorate the state and all of its functions and all of its powers, right? Right now, the deterioration of the state can and will likely lead to social unrest, violence, and at the very extreme, civil war. Because while we have all these people who are pro-liberty who will stay in schools, take their parents out of schools, these police officers who will not work for a state which asks of them something completely unconstitutional and something morally and, as you say, under the guise of natural law, bad and wrong and not good to other human beings. Well, all those police officers and all those kids and all those teachers who leave those jobs of employment, whether they're for resources or whether they're for hospitality, the people left will be the arbiters and the enforcers of the state's policy. And then you're going to have two separate sides of the state and even larger of the country, the side who does not want this and the side who does. And you can say, well, that's good. But then you have to ask yourself the question, how do those two solve this? And there's only two possible solutions which I have come to. Either there's a peaceful divorce nationally, or there's a very, very hot conflict, which we haven't had in a while. And I think one of those is going to happen. I'm not sure which one yet. I think on certain days I see we go more towards peaceful divorce. On certain days I'm like, well, Antifa people just shot someone, and there's violence in the streets of Portland, and there's violence in Virginia. And I'm like, well, maybe we're closer to a civil war. But either way, Kareem, I believe the scales are tipping, and I believe the state is going to lose its functions inadvertently or not. And I think at least if Youngkin wins, he can do some good things. But regardless, Biden's the president, and this OSHA mandate is looking very likely. It's looking very likely like it's going to happen. And once that goes into place, whether Youngkin's governor or not, if Youngkin obeys that mandate, if he enforces that mandate, that will really be the true test, because it could happen like that regardless, Kareem. It could be that Youngkin gets in, but Biden imposes this mandate and Youngkin doesn't disobey it and he enforces it, and then people quit and leave en masse anyways. So we could see both scenarios kind of play out in either ways, whoever wins. But I think regardless, right now that I'm seeing that scares me truly is that people are being pinned against each other, and that the division of classes and the division of individuals based off of political belief is heightening. Violence is increasing, and tensions are increasing. Even though the state's powers are going to be slowly evaporated, I know that they'll be fine in their super yachts and their boats and their mansions, but a lot of the people who don't have all that can't just go away, can't leave. I mean, you can't even leave the country with that right now. If I go to Canada, I'm going to be stuck there for God knows how long, until I literally will have to get a vaccine to come back. So it feels like, now this is just a theory, I'm going to propose it, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with the term globalist and globalization, globalism, right? It seems like what's been happening globally is that under the pretext of COVID, every nation has been secluded and locked down. So you have all these states, and now it's going to be made nearly impossible to travel globally and internationally, which I think is coming down the road, without going through a lot of red tape and without taking a medical procedure. Now we're seeing flu shot mandates in certain places, and in schools. And so this doesn't end as far as like the state's powers diminishing, but I just would not like to see it happen in a very violent and grotesque way, but I think that I kind of debate this, whether it's going to happen or not. I look at it and I think to myself, I don't know which one is inevitable, but I think one of them are. I don't think it's like a weather of likelihood. I think one of those is inevitable, but I can't really point my finger to what, because I say to myself, humans are not naturally necessarily good or naturally bad, right? Environment shapes us a lot, right? Some people are born with certain ailments and whatnot that affect us. But we, over the last 2,000 years, have always, and this is a sad thing to say about humanity, but we have always gone more towards violence than peace in a lot of areas, especially when it comes to social, national, and global conflicts. We have gone towards violence every time in this case. And I do not see a reason why this time we will not go towards the violent direction. And I'm not even sure if the violent direction is necessarily the worst way, because you have to scare a state, right? Like the only way your government's not gonna do tyrannical things is if they fear you, the self-government of that nation. And if they fear you, they'll fear being tyrannical towards you, because they will actually get heat. But right now, they can literally cocoon themselves and isolate themselves from the lower class, the poors, as they call them, and they won't have to face any danger. So I don't think they really have any fear, and I think they're going to continue doing what they're doing until something happens. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just saying right now tensions start to look what they did pre-60s. And we could see, and this is not saying it's going to happen, but given the historical evidence, we could see some sort of like assassination attempts, violence towards actual political figures. I truly think that's what's coming next. I think that the next step in this thing is going to be, there's going to be attacks against political figures. When you're telling someone you can't go see your mother because you don't have a vaccine, and they have Guillain-Barré syndrome, so if they take a vaccine, they'll die within 6 days. You tell that person you can't see your mother because your mother's in Canada, and the only way you can go over there is if you get a vaccine. Well, those people are going to get very, very, very angry very quickly, and they'll likely seek violence against those keeping them from their well-being and their pursuance of happiness.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I'll just end this by saying I think peaceful divorce is the best option. I think, and I'll even do an episode by myself, or with you, knocking down all of the objections to it. The one that I think is driving me the craziest is like that just anything is like you can't do any kind of restructuring cream. China will just pop up like this.
I know. I hate that, dude. I think peaceful divorce is by far the better option. The thing that I grapple with is psychologically, I don't see it as what's most likely, what human nature gravitates towards. But I want it, dude. Like if it's like we're having these problems. Let's settle it. Peaceful divorce is the better option.
I'm all for the peaceful thing. I don't want to see people, even political figures who I don't like, even the postmodernist folks. I don't want anything bad. I want a peaceful divorce because that seems like the best way out of this situation in the most civilized way possible. And that's what I'm all about. Mises is all about that too. I think that's what most folks are about, truthfully. I do think people, okay, I will slightly disagree. Based on my reading on history, really looking back, not just like looking at Westerns and pirates and stuff. Because you always, when you go back in human history, you like think, oh, Vikings were just raiding and killing, which they did. Pirates were just, going around and attacking people indiscriminately, which they did some of that. And the Wild Wild West was just every, other day there was cowboys and duels and bank robberies. I really looked at those things from like a libertarian perspective of people who went and studied this. And yeah, there's a lot of externalities because we're humans, but there was a lot of ways to mitigate violence based on property norms, social norms, and customary law. So it's not, yes, there's violence, but humans tend to find a way to say, hey, maybe I don't like you, but I don't want my wall getting pushed in while I'm trying to do a YouTube show. So let's figure out a non-violent solution so we can attain some social cooperation. So even though I don't like you, even though I really dislike you, like the Japanese don't like the Chinese, the British don't like the French. Even if you fix the Israeli-Palestinian problem, I don't think they'd like each other. I just say, hey, let's not fight each other. Yemenis and so I can keep going. But there are ways to mitigate, I think, social occurrences through trade, through property rights, through customary law that can help. So I'll end it on there. I just got two really quick subjects. I'm going to hit one. My friend, speaking of elections, Kate Crosby, is running in Austin, PA, not Austin, Texas. So people get confused with that. So I just kind of want to give her a shout out. She's running for mayor. And a lot of people say like, well, okay, fine. Mayor is okay and stuff. The mayor has a lot of power. People need to understand that local elections are, if not, are more important than federal elections. Local elections and state elections can really determine what happens in your life. So this is the website for it, and I just want to give Kate a shout out. I really am pulling for her. I think she is going to win, and it's because the mayor hasn't done really anything in a long time. So this is her page, Kate Crosby, Austin, PA mayor. If you can, go give it a like. Get involved, see what she's saying if you live in that town in PA or in the surrounding towns, because that does matter. I also want to highlight one thing Prince Edward said, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to spend a ton of time on this, but let's do it real quick. This is CNBC. Pulling this, I'm not pulling this from a band or anything. This is crazy that a mainstream media wouldn't try and change this. Prince Charles calls for warlike footing. Lovely. In a speech at pivotal, COP26 climate change summit, such a nice guy, royal family. He called for an urgent call at the opening, those attending the climate change summit. The time had run out. Oh my God. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat to the extent that we have to put ourselves in might be a warlike footing. And I'm not going to get into like the whole thing because this doesn't need tons and tons of time to investigate. Let me just say this. There's a lot of billionaires who want to kind of guilt you and me and everybody else who's watching this and say, hey, because we're part of the rich boys club, we should dictate how you live. And I know I have a jet that has more carbon footprint than all of you combined, but you should give up your
basic necessities like oil, gas, and petrol. It's like, well, how come you don't give that up? How come you actually use those, like you said, way more than we do? Why are you doing this? Well, it's because why does Obama and Clinton buy literally together multiple handfuls of properties on the beach if they're so worried about climate change, because all the data shows that rising tides are going to start up very soon, and it's going to wipe away anything within its path. So why are they buying beach houses on beach house front properties? Why? If they're so scared, why? If they really care about the environment, why do they do the exact opposite of what they say? It's because I truly think that they don't care. I think maybe some people actually do, but I think most people, when it comes to politicians, actually don't give a shit. You know who does care about the environment? I think Elon Musk actually truly cares about the environment. He made a company to actually enable people to actually adopt electric cars and to better serve the environment. Politicians aren't doing that. They're coming up with the Green New Deal, which has all that equity and stuff implemented into it. So I think it's like again, I use this word a lot, but it's the same thing with 9/11 being the pretext to the Patriot Act. It's using a crisis to then push a deeper and more implicit agenda, and that's all it is.
Yeah, that's to me what politics is. You know, I love the saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," because then you just pick and choose. Oh, it's the people in the Middle East. It's the climate. It's this virus. It's pick anything that's bad. It's CO2 in the air. It's more people are watching Carrot Top and think of him as a legitimate comedian. This is such a terrible thing. I agree with him there. It is. We should do something. I agree there too. But they're always going to take it to say, how can it help me? They're not sitting there thinking, they're not being altruistic, like, oh, how can I really help? They're thinking, wow, this is such a bad issue. How can I profit from it? Because getting a job and learning to trade Bitcoin or doing any of this, that's hard work. I don't want to do that. How can I just get paid? So I just wanted to highlight that. I don't want to spend a ton of time on anything Prince Edward says, because I don't frankly like listening to him, or Biden or Trump or any of those dudes for that matter. I don't feel it's very worth my time.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens in Virginia. I have my fingers crossed that Virginia will have a good outcome either way.
Yeah, you were right though, man, about what you said earlier.
And and that's pretty much it for this show. I can even do another show and debunk all, because I'd love to do that at some point. Debunk all the secession's bad. Here's all the scary things about.
Well, China's gonna get us, Kareem. You have to understand, as soon as we succeed, China's gonna nuke us immediately, and they're gonna destroy all the states. So we can't do it.
And Russia and Iran. I don't know how Iran's gonna do it, but they're gonna do it. And people brought like Venezuela. I'm like, okay, fine.
Dude, they can't even afford like fucking burritos there right now.
And North Korea, they're gonna get their one paddle faster.
Yeah.
We want to invade PA. Oh, dude, I feel like 10 people from PA could take North Korea. Like me, you, and like a couple.
They do have some decent. I saw in the news the other day. I don't know if you heard. They just implemented one of these submarine nukes. But the submarine's really shitty. The nukes aren't bad, but the submarine nuke is like basically we and China and Russia were the only countries that had submarine nukes. Now North Korea has like one. They have literally one. So, I mean, I'm just saying it's not that big of a fear. You got to understand we're dealing with North Korea. Like over 50% of the people who live there are malnourished. They're not going to invade us. I can guarantee you if they invade us, all we have to do is just leave for like 2 days because they'll starve to death. So we got to worry about nukes, but they don't even have that many nukes. And if you look at the technology behind it, a lot of people who work in physics and specifically nuclear physics say that their bombs are a lot closer to dirty bombs and lower grade bombs. But it doesn't matter, man. North Korea is the definition of a dystopian state and authoritarian, totalitarian. Yeah. I feel for the people there, dude. I really, truly do. It's bad.
Especially after listening to Yeonmi Park, you make some good points. But anyway, I'm going to close this episode off because we're going at an hour, 40 minutes. We can also do another one. Guys, if you like this episode, we went over Virginia. Quick thing on Austin and Prince Edward. If you want to continue the Ron Paul revolution, keep the ideals of Murray Rothbard alive, and make a big impact in the world for the positive. Not one more war, lockdown, bailout, or mandate. Move humanity forward. Go to the LPMisesCaucus.com. You can check out our resources, podcasts, articles, our team. You can even join the LP, and you can check out some of the awesome things that we stand for inside the Libertarian Party. So check that out today at LPMises.com. You can even click on resources and look at our actions to learn more about us. Also, I want to thank Daniel Bitro. He has a YouTube channel, The Quantum Effect. He does not talk about atoms, although it would be cool if he did. Just kidding. But you can go on YouTube and type in The Quantum Effect, which I will go ahead and do now, and then you can go ahead and find him. So I'll go over to ye old YouTube. The Quantum Effect.
Just look up Daniel B. I think it should pop up on that.
Yeah, because I showed it last time, but I want to show people how they can get there. The Quantum Effect, Daniel B. Put a space. I try Daniel Bitro. Oh, I find it. B. Kareem Mace.
Here. Can you hear me, Kareem?
Yes, I found it. Okay, Daniel B. So if you type in Daniel B, you can also type in my name, Kareem Mays. Daniel B is the channel name. The show is called The Quantum Effect, and you can find all of his works here. He has some really good podcasts that we've done together. Also, some on things about truther movements, talking about Tesla.
Are you muted? I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now? Hello? Daniel? Anyway, had a little connection thing, but you can find him at Daniel B at the show The Quantum Effect. So I'm just going to go ahead and end the show now. This is the Essential Libertarians. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, giving you the tools for self-governance. I really thank everybody who turned in. Let's see a good outcome in Virginia, a good outcome in Austin, PA, and have a great night.